I caught her on security camera cutting my farm's power lines at 2 a.m. The footage not only saved my farm, it cost her $50,000 and everything she owned. Mark woke up to silence at 4 a.m. That's when he knew something was terribly wrong on his farm. The humming of his irrigation system, the sound that had been his morning alarm for 15 years, was gone. Something was very, very wrong. He threw on clothes and raced outside, not bothering with his boots. His stomach dropped when he saw his fields. No water, no movement, just acres of crops already starting to wilt in the early dawn light. Mark sprinted to the control panel, yanking it open to check for tripped circuits or blown fuses. Everything looked normal inside. Then he looked up. The power lines feeding his entire farm operation had been cut. Not damaged by weather, not worn through by time, cut clean through with what must have been heavy-duty tools. The cables dangled uselessly from the poles, their exposed ends catching the morning light. This was deliberate sabotage, and Mark already knew exactly who was responsible. Patricia had moved into the neighboring property 6 months ago. City woman, city attitude. From day one, she'd complained about everything: the occasional farm smells, the sound of tractors, even the eyesore of the power lines that happened to be visible from her back deck. Mark's jaw tightened as he stalked toward the property line. Sure enough, there was Patricia, leaning against her porch railing, coffee mug in hand, watching him with undisguised satisfaction. "Morning, farmer," she called out sweetly, raising her mug in a mocking toast. "Beautiful day, isn't it? So peaceful and quiet." "Did you cut my power lines?" Mark demanded, his voice razor sharp. Patricia tilted her head, eyes wide with fake innocence. "Power lines? Oh, those ugly things that were ruining everyone's view." Her smile widened. "Let's just say the neighborhood looks much better now." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mark struggled to keep his voice steady. "Those lines power my entire operation. My irrigation, my cold storage, my processing equipment, everything." Patricia sipped her coffee leisurely. "Not my problem. Maybe you should have considered aesthetics before setting up your little hobby farm." "Hobby farm?" Mark's hands gripped the fence separating their property so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is my livelihood. My family has farmed this land for 3 generations." "Well," Patricia shrugged, "I guess you should have picked a different career. One that doesn't involve ugly equipment and constant noise disrupting property values." Mark wanted nothing more than to vault the fence and wipe that smug look off her face. Instead, he pulled out his phone and snapped several pictures of the damaged lines. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly, turning away. "We'll see about that," Patricia called after him. "Run along and fix your little problem, and this time try doing it without those hideous wires." By noon, the consequences were piling up. The sun beat down mercilessly on crops that desperately needed water. The refrigeration units for his dairy products had shut down, leaving thousands of dollars of product at risk. His animals were growing agitated without their normal water supply. Every hour without electricity meant more financial damage. The power company technician arrived in the afternoon, surveying the damage with a low whistle. "Someone really did a number on these lines," he said, adjusting his hard hat. "This is deliberate sabotage." "How soon can you fix it?" Mark asked, wiping sweat from his brow. The man grimaced. "Standard repair time is about a week." "I don't have a week," Mark said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Everything will be dead by then." "Well," the technician scratched his beard, "we could do an emergency repair. Rush job, special crew, but it'll cost you about $15,000. Mark's stomach sank. $15,000 he didn't have just sitting around, not with the thin margins of modern farming. That night, Mark reviewed his security camera footage. He'd installed the system after Patricia had repeatedly trespassed to leave complaint notes on his equipment. The night vision wasn't perfect, but at 2:17 a.m. the footage clearly showed Patricia, bolt cutters in hand, methodically cutting through each power line. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. This was premeditated destruction. Mark downloaded the footage to his phone and called Sheriff Ramirez. "I've got her on camera," Mark said the next morning, sitting in the sheriff's office. "Clear as day." Sheriff Ramirez watched the footage twice, her expression darkening. "Tampering with power lines is a felony," she said finally. "This isn't just vandalism, it's criminal destruction of utilities infrastructure." "What happens now?" Mark asked. "I'll pay Ms. Miller a visit today, file charges." The sheriff studied Mark's face. "You sure you want to pursue this? Legal battles get messy." "She's cost me thousands already," Mark said firmly. "My crops are dying. My storage is warming up. She did this knowing exactly what would happen." "All right then," Sheriff Ramirez nodded. "Let's make this official." By afternoon, Patricia had been served with legal papers. Mark watched from his truck as she read the documents, her expression transitioning from smug to shocked to furious. Patricia stormed across to where Mark stood, waving the papers wildly. "Are you serious?" she shrieked. "You're suing me over some stupid wires?" Mark didn't flinch. "Not just suing, pressing criminal charges." "This is ridiculous," Patricia spluttered. "It's just some ugly cables." "It's felony tampering with utility infrastructure," Mark replied calmly. "Sheriff says you're looking at up to $50,000 in fines and possible jail time." Patricia's face paled, then flushed red. "You can't do this. I was improving the neighborhood." "Tell it to the judge," Mark said, turning away. "This isn't over, Anderson," Patricia shouted after him. "I have friends in high places." For the next 2 weeks, Mark worked tirelessly to salvage what he could of his farm while preparing for the legal battle ahead. Patricia, meanwhile, launched a social media campaign portraying herself as the victim, claiming Mark's farm was an eyesore, that the power lines were unsafe, even suggesting he had staged the video to frame her. Each desperate attempt only strengthened Mark's resolve. The day before court, Mark's lawyer called. Patricia's attorney reached out about a settlement. They're offering $20,000 to drop all charges. Mark thought about his dead crops, his sick animals, the emergency repairs he'd gone into debt for. "No deal," he said firmly. "This isn't just about money, it's about accountability." The courtroom was packed the next morning. Patricia sat at the defendant's table in designer clothes, flanked by an expensive-looking attorney who kept whispering in her ear. Mark wore his one good pair of jeans and a clean button-down shirt. The proceedings began with Patricia's attorney painting her as a community-minded neighbor concerned about safety and aesthetics. The lawyer portrayed Mark as an unreasonable farmer refusing to modernize his operations. Then it was Mark's turn. Without fanfare, his attorney played the security footage. The courtroom fell silent as they watched Patricia methodically cutting through each power line, taking her time, clearly knowing exactly what she was doing. Next came the power company's report confirming deliberate sabotage. Then the agricultural assessor's detailed documentation of damages, over $35,000 in lost crops, livestock issues, and emergency repairs. When Patricia took the stand in her own defense, her arrogance became her undoing. "Those power lines were hideous," she declared indignantly. "They destroyed the natural beauty of the valley. I moved here for the views, not to stare at utility infrastructure." "So you admit to cutting the lines?" the prosecutor asked. Patricia hesitated, then lifted her chin defiantly. Someone had to do something about them. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even her attorney looked pained. "And were you aware those lines powered Mr. Anderson's entire farm operation?" the prosecutor continued. I assumed he had backup systems, Patricia said dismissively. Any properly run business would. The judge deliberated for less than 20 minutes. When he returned, his expression was severe. "Ms. Miller," he began, "this court finds your actions not only criminally liable but morally reprehensible. You deliberately sabotaged essential infrastructure out of pure selfishness, with no regard for the devastating consequences." Patricia started to speak, but the judge silenced her with a look. "I am imposing the maximum fine of $50,000 for tampering with utility infrastructure. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $35,700 in damages to Mr. Anderson, plus all legal costs and emergency repair fees." Patricia's face drained of color. "That's almost $100,000. "Yes," the judge agreed coldly. "Perhaps next time you'll consider the cost before taking bolt cutters to someone else's livelihood." In the weeks that followed, Patricia's retaliation began. Floodlights aimed at Mark's bedroom window, late-night parties with music blasting across the fields, garbage piled along the property line, accidentally blowing onto Mark's land. Mark ignored it all. He installed blackout curtains, used earplugs, focused on rebuilding his farm. Then, one evening, he noticed moving trucks parked at Patricia's house. The next morning, as Mark was fixing a fence, Patricia approached him. She looked different, the arrogance gone from her face, replaced by something like defeat. "I'm leaving," she said simply. Mark waited, saying nothing. "The lawsuit wiped me out," Patricia continued, her voice bitter. "I can't afford to keep the house. Are you happy now?" "I never wanted this," Mark replied honestly. "I just wanted to farm my land in peace." Patricia laughed without humor. "Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted. I'm ruined." As she turned to leave, Mark called after her. "For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're looking for somewhere else." Patricia paused, then kept walking without looking back. A month later, a modest pickup truck pulled into the driveway of Patricia's former house. A middle-aged couple got out, surveying the property with appreciative eyes. The woman noticed Mark working nearby and approached the fence. "Hi there, I'm Laura Johnson. That's my husband, Ray. Looks like we're going to be neighbors." Mark wiped his hands on his jeans before shaking hers. "Mark Anderson, welcome." "Thanks," Laura smiled warmly. "We've been looking for a place like this for years. We're hoping to start a small organic operation, maybe some beekeeping. Ray's an agricultural scientist, and I used to manage a farmer's market." For the first time in months, Mark felt something like hope. "Those power lines," Laura gestured to the repaired utilities. "Do they provide good service out here? We're thinking of supplementing with solar, but it's good to have reliable grid power." Mark couldn't help but laugh. "They work just fine, and if you're interested in solar, I've been looking into that myself. Maybe we could get a better rate if we went in on it together." Over the next few months, the property that had been the source of so much conflict became an ally. Laura and Ray transformed their land into a productive small farm that complemented Mark's operation. They shared equipment during harvest, traded expertise, and even opened a joint farm stand by the main road. 1 year to the day after Patricia cut those power lines, Mark hosted a harvest dinner. Neighbors filled his barn, tables loaded with food grown within sight of where they sat. Ray raised his glass. To Mark, a man who stood his ground when it would have been easier not to. Later that night, Mark walked to the edge of his property. The power lines that had caused so much trouble hummed softly, doing their job without fanfare or recognition. Sometimes it takes nearly losing something to truly appreciate its value. And sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. The entitled neighbor who thought money put her above consequences, she lost everything: her home, her reputation, her sense of superiority. And Mark, he gained not just a legal victory, but something far more valuable. Neighbors who understood that in farming communities, We rise or fall together. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought rules didn't apply to them? Like this video, if you've ever fought for what's right when it would have been easier to back down. Subscribe for more true stories of everyday justice.